Dashachedo Kia Ani Dashanale. Ro Kwaake Diné College Waliahde Ade Shaultra. Welcome. My name is Velma Hale. I'm an English professor here, and also I work with the Education Division, Center for Diné Teacher Ed and Northwest Teacher Ed program as well. I also want to thank you all for coming to the Still Sacred First Year of Writing at the Tribal College 2025 session. We had two wonderful speakers from our own faculty. The School of Arts Humanity Division comprises of the Fine Arts Department and also the Humanities and the English Division. I would like to recognize Matt Evertson from Gunnison, also to thank him and Brenda for being here. They will be presenting tomorrow. And then we have Dr. Carla Britton also, who had presented this morning, along with Sheldon Harvey. They presented their work that they practice here as far as incorporating Indigenous sovereignty into the fields, whether it be from architectural perspective, historical, or it might be from a studio arts perspective. Tomorrow you'll get to see some of the literary pieces from English instructors of how they teach English in the first year writing program. I would like to also thank the Diné Study Kia'ani Library under Dr. Herman Peterson and Rihanna Sorrell, and also Mary for allowing us to use the RC Gorman Room here. And then also I'd like to acknowledge our interim provost, Dr. Alyssa Landry. And also we have a council member from the Navajo Nation, from the Shiprock side. We have Amber Knazba-Crotty also representing from the Navajo Nation. And then we have other faculty who are also here, like Jesse Maloney, he's from the Tuba City site. And we have Debra Robinson, who's also a faculty here. She'll be doing her presentation tomorrow. So again, I welcome each of you. And earlier I spoke of a prayer that opened this gathering. So it's still a continuation of that. And you see the different ways in which indigeneity comes out either through writing or it comes out through historical architectural work perspective from a sacred space, sacred geometry, or it might be from a poet's perspective. And so here at the Diné College, we try to reclaim that sovereignty, and it ties in with the mission statement of Diné College. And we have neighboring colleges and universities that are beginning to embrace that indigeneity. And we see that in our presenters today. Today we have three presenters from the University of Utah. The first of the presenter is Dr. Christie Toth. She's an associate professor of the Department of Writing and Rhetoric Studies at the University of Utah, where she currently serves as coordinator of transfer initiatives and community college partnerships. She taught and researched composition with the Diné College faculty from 2012 to 15, experiences that have been foundational to her subsequent work as a teacher and scholar. Dr. Toth teaches a range of undergraduate and graduate courses related to equity and social justice issues in literacy education. She has been published on many aspects of writing instruction at access-oriented institutions, including the book Transfer in an Urban Writing Ecology, Reimagining Community College-University Relations in Composition Studies, which was published in 2023, which was co-authored with Salt Lake City Community College students and faculty. Their presentation title is called Land as Pedagogy in Indigenous-centered Composition Classes. We also have two other speakers along with Dr. Toth. The first, we have Jessica Begay. She is a Diné woman from the Navajo Nation, specifically from Gallup, New Mexico. She's currently a graduate student at the University of Utah in the Writing and Rhetoric Studies Department. Her interests are in Indigenous rhetoric. In addition to pursuing her degree, she is creative at heart. She enjoys creating art, whether on a canvas or paper, through words, or with the motions she makes with her hands. Writing gives her the power to share her story and the story of her ancestors and people who came before her. She strives to pursue what is on her mind and what means the most in her heart. So that's Jessica Nicole Begay. And the second person, along with the University of Utah, Jessica Holliday, is from Monument Valley, Utah, which is located in the Utah portion of the Navajo Nation. Her maternal clan is the Tutchitni, Red Running into the Water People. She is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. She graduated from Arizona State University in 2011 with a bachelor's degree in family and human development and a minor in American Indian Studies. She earned her MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in fiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts in 2021. Jessica is a first-year PhD student in the Writing Rhetoric Studies program at the University of Utah. Her research focuses on public lands and tribal sovereignty, explicitly investigating the rhetorics of Bears Ears National Monument. She is also a graduate teaching assistant who teaches first-year writing courses at the University of Utah, including one course that centers on Indigenous rhetoric. So please welcome Dr. Christie Toth.
In 2012, when I was researching, basically sitting in on, basically sitting in on classes with several writing faculty here at Diné College, and also meeting regularly with some of their students to interview them and learn about their experiences in writing classes. And actually, many of the interviews I did were in this room in its older configuration when it was a little more like a conference room. So it means a lot to me to be like literally right here where I was like 13 years ago. I just wanted to briefly introduce myself and say thank you before turning things over to Jessica. And Jessica, my excellent colleagues and collaborators here, just so you all know a bit about where I'm coming from, and then I'm gonna jump back in a little bit later in our time today. So you kind of know about my family and where I'm coming from. Both of my parents were career military, so I actually moved. As I was telling the Jessicas on the drive down, I've lived in Utah in Salt Lake City for 11 years now, and that's more than twice as long as I ever lived anywhere before I moved to Utah. My family moved around a lot. You know, my mother's background is German, Irish, and Welsh, and my father's grandparents were Hungarian immigrants, and also some English and Scottish ancestry. My father had grown up in Puerto Rico his whole life, so that side of the family is bilingual in English and Spanish. Our family gatherings kind of sound a lot like the grandparents only speaking Spanish, my parents and my dad's siblings all speaking a mix of Spanish and English, and then me and my cousins following along and being kind of embarrassed about how bad our Spanish is. But you know, I moved around a lot, and really a lot of my commitments and passions as a teacher and scholar have to do with recognizing, you know, partly through my time here that, you know, my own family history, my own relationships with place and with land are profoundly entangled with various forms of American militarism and colonialism. That in many costs to many people of that, but among them is I don't have the kinds of connections to land that I know many students here, that's part of their birthright. And in one way or another, all of my own research, much of which is with community college students and faculty, is really about believing that everyone should have access to an education that's meaningful and relevant and allows them to grow the ways they want to grow without having to leave the communities that they're part of, without having to leave the lands they're on, without having to leave their responsibilities to the people around them. And I'm really committed to institutions that make that possible. And I learned so much about that from my time here at Diné College. the last 5 years, it's been 5 years since I was here actually, which is a little bit hard for me to believe. The last time I was in Navajo Nation was in fall 2019, and I was pregnant with my son. And I hadn't been back since. I had a baby in a pandemic, and then things have been a little wild since then, personally and professionally. But I think all the time about the fact that my child carries a little bit of these lands too, because I was here while I was carrying him. So I think I spent some time in the last, in the kind of middle of my junior faculty years, really very much wanting to find ways to give back and reciprocate what I had learned in this space. It definitely informs my teaching personally, but feeling like I really wanted to be able to give back in some way. And over the years, when my friend LaFrenda Frank was still with us, we did some curricular exchanges and visited. I was really grateful that another person who taught me a lot over the years, Dr. Paul Walletto, invited me to contribute to the Still Sacred conference a couple years ago when it was fully online. But it's really been just in the last couple of years that I feel like I've been in a position to take what I've learned and be able to offer it back, particularly through the work with Jessica Begay, who I met in, I think it was 2022, right, Jessica? Right coming out of the pandemic. Dr. Francie Taylor, who was the director of the American Indian Resource Center at the University of Utah, contacted me and said, I feel like many of our students here are struggling with writing. How can we partner with your department to support Native students on campus as writers? And it turned out Jessica was with us and had just decided to study writing and rhetoric. And from there, she first was working sort of like an embedded writing center tuner, but at the American Indian Resource Center instead of at the main writing center on our campus. So being in that space where the students already were finding each other and finding community and finding comfort. And then that grew into becoming a graduate student. And but I've been in a position to help support the brilliant work that Jessica Begay and now Jessica Holliday have done over the last few years, partnering with what's now called the Center for Native Excellence, to teach versions of the required first-year writing courses at the University of Utah that center Indigenous rhetorics, that are really committed to supporting Native students and are taught at the Center for Native Excellence. So the class is actually there, which was a new arrangement. I think it's the first time classes have been offered in that space before too. So I'm very grateful that I've had that opportunity to keep learning from the work that we've been doing together. And I'm so grateful that you all invited me back and then were willing, when I asked if I could bring two people much smarter than me along to share the work. I'm really grateful that Dr. Kwan graciously said, yes, bring them, because we've learned so much, or I should say I've learned so much in the last 6 weeks as we've been pulling these materials together and talking and reading and building this workshop. So when we spoke on the phone, Dr. Kwan said, come and share with us some things that are happening in the field of composition in writing studies that might be important for the work we do. And two of his suggestions were ratiolinguistics and AI. And ratiolinguistics, I was like, okay, I've been following these conversations. AI was like, oh no, I've sort of been trying to avoid some of the, it's been a bit much. And I was not as plugged into those conversations in the field, but I should have been. And this was an opportunity to learn more. And in our conversations, Jessica it very quickly became clear that thinking about land as pedagogy in the work and the spaces they've been doing, that gives us maybe some important and valuable ways to think about both ratiolinguistics and generative AI and how those interrelate with each other in relation to writing instruction. So that's the triangle we're going to try to bring together here today. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jessica Begay. Oh, yes. Take the microphone. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Yate, She'e Jessica Begay Yeneshia, Batutni Nishlan, Hashkan Hudso, Bashachi, Tachini Dashache, and Kiani Dashanella. I am from Crown Point, New Mexico. My family is from there, but I grew up in Gallup, New Mexico as well. And I feel like that definitely is the reason why I'm here today, and definitely why I am doing the research I do as well. So I am going to present to you, let's see, about my class that I created with the help of Christie Toth. So as I was in the process of creating the class and thinking about different ways of how I can support students through this classroom and ensure that they're receiving and getting out as much as they can, utilizing their own cultures and their own identity. Christie Toth actually shared with me the educational philosophy taught here at the Diné College. And I have to say, it really helped me ground myself, especially one of the presenters earlier mentioned that sometimes you just have to sit with your thoughts. You have to think a little bit more critically, and ensure that you're including as much as you can in your work of yourself as well. So the class was designed specifically to be in collaboration with the American Indian Resource Center here, their Circle program, also known as Centering Indigenous Reciprocity, Culture, Leadership, and Engagement. And in that process of working and collaborating with the American Indian Resource Center, we came together and they wanted to ensure that not only were students engaging with Indigenous rhetoric, but they wanted to ensure that they were given the chance to learn a little bit more about Native issues, Native rights, a lot of things that were happening in and around the community of Salt Lake, but also outside of the community as well, while also encouraging civic engagement, so getting out into the community, getting to know their higher ups, whether that's in their tribe or even out into Salt Lake City. But in this book, Native Presence and Sovereignty for College, written by Dr. Amanda R. Tutchitney, she wrote this during the pandemic. And when I first got this book, oh my gosh, I wish that I had something like this when I was in my undergrad. I truly wish that I was able to have something like this to lead me and guide me through the process of figuring out higher ed and realizing that it's okay to not be like everybody else. And it's okay to have your own path. And, you know, looking beyond to see, looking back to my younger self, I definitely think about all of the many life lessons that I gained along the way. And just like many of the presenters earlier, they mentioned having to go home, having to first go home to, you know, whether it's your grandparents, your parents' house. When I went home, I wanted to ensure that I was doing that critical thinking by myself with the land around me, but also ensuring that I am remembering all of the life lessons and a lot of the stories that my grandmother and my grandfather both shared with me as well. And I'm sure their own parents and grandparents as well shared with them. So generation to generation, they continued those stories. And I hope to, you know, continue to pass down those stories as well through not only just telling them, but also in my research and telling, teaching as well. So in this class, I created a list of assignments. First began the garden report, and I hope to talk about that a little bit more later on in the discussion. But I also created an assignment called What is Writing? And, you know, historically looking back, English and writing has been something that's been not necessarily troublesome, but maybe in some way bad, you know, and another word that I could think of is iya. Native education, or education in general, has been something that many of our people were traumatized by, and many of them were displaced and taken away from their own communities as well. So in that assignment, many of them talked about just that exactly that time of boarding school era, that many of their grandparents had to leave their home and figure out, why are we writing? Why are we using another language that is not ours? So I invited them to talk about the language that either they grew up in, or even English writing, basically making sense of it all. What is writing? What do we do with it? How do we utilize it? And how do we plan to utilize it future on down the road in their own careers and in their own majors as well? And the third assignment was write to higher ups in your community. So that goes and coincides with what the Circle program wanted the students to do, which was civic engagement and working with either tribal members or even people who were in the Greater Salt Lake to know a little bit more about your community. But I've even had some students write to Bu Naigwin during that time, whether it was about something that they were concerned about or things such as that. So it didn't only occur just in Salt Lake only, it even went all the way back home to the Navajo Nation as well. And the last assignment that I created was what means the most to you. And in that assignment, I wanted to invite them to really think about the things that makes them them. So like I mentioned before, a lot of the teachings that I learned from my grandmother, that is what made me me. And, that led me to not only becoming a teacher, but also pursue art, pursue poetry, and so many of these things that, make us us, right? And in that process of doing so, I wanted to ensure that those students had a chance to tell the world who they are, but also help them utilize that in their own research and in their own findings as well. So this is what one student decided to do in that final project. He made pozole. So he identifies as Mexican, and he wanted to utilize the kitchen that is in the American Indian Resource Center house there. And he went ahead and he got to the building early, and he started, putting the meat on. Then he asked some of the students to help him. And one of the young girls sitting there, she offered to make fry bread. And so in some way, they all collaborated and they came together to create this beautiful meal for us, but also give him a chance to reflect on his own identity, while also mixing our own identity, which is fry bread as well. So I thought that was such a beautiful way to kind of finish off the semester and end it off there. During the class, we also had Tsaile Drake, who is a poet, Darcy Little Badger, who is an author, visit the classroom. They brought along an individual who is a publisher. So in case that any of these students wanted to either work with a publisher to, publish their own works, whatever, stories, poetry, books in general, they invited a publisher to come and meet there with them in that classroom. But they had a nice lesson from Tsaile Drake and from Darcy as well. And this is another project of my students. She wanted to teach the class how to bead. So what meant the most to her was learning how to bead. She's an individual who identifies as an urban Indigenous woman. And since she never had the experience to come home to the reservation, she wanted to ensure that she could learn as much as she could about the culture. And so she took on learning how to bead, and this is her teaching the class and directing us through it. So I didn't teach at all during these days. They just went ahead and taught that class there to each other. And so you can see everybody working along with her as she is teaching us. She brought in those beads there. All of the materials she set up for us as well. Here is one of my beadworks here, and we ended up finishing all of our keychains, and now everyone still has theirs. I still hold on to mine very, very dearly, but I'm very, very happy to have that experience. Another student of mine, she is a hoop dancer in the community of Salt Lake, and one of her part of her project was that she wanted to teach the class how to hoop dance. At least, if you were a little bit shy, she understood, but she at least wanted to get people to know the, background and the historical meaning behind it. And she told us a story that her grandparents shared with her during that time. And there's two of my other class students there learning from her. But it's been such a beautiful experience to see these students come together and reflect on their own experiences and identities as Native people. And the class has only gotten better, especially since Jessica Holiday has now taken that over. And I think I will leave you there. I plan to talk a little bit more about that garden report later in our discussion, but I will now turn that time over to Jessica Holiday.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Hello, Yate. Chachini Nishle, look at Diné Bashichin, Bilagana Dashiche, Tortichini Dashinala. So I am a first year PhD student at the University of Utah, and I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts MFA Creative Writing program. So it's a tribal college, and I had an amazing experience there. I felt like it was the first time I was able to be like the predominant majority there. I didn't feel like a minority or a marginalized person, because most of my classmates, my cohort, they were also Indigenous. And so that was an amazing experience to feel. It felt like I had a non-Eurocentric educational experience. And I went from 2019 to 2021, so right during the pandemic. But the director at the time was Santee Frazier, the poet, writer, and he's amazing. I met some amazing people in my cohort, Stacy Danette-Sosi, Amelia Vigil, Conley Lyons. We still keep in touch, and they have just an amazing program. So if you're interested in getting an MFA in creative writing, I highly recommend the Institute of American Indian Arts. I also went to Arizona State University for my undergrad, and during my time there, I graduated high school in 2005 and then went straight to ASU, fall of that year. So it was a really hard experience because it was just 50,000 people on the ASU main campus, and I was like, where am I? But they have a great American Indian Student Services Support Center. I took English 101 and 102, and they called it the rainbow section, where it was predominantly Indigenous students in those classes. And we did focus on Indigenous authors, which was amazing. So I feel like that experience was a really, really good one for me. So I want to acknowledge that the kind of framework of this presentation, we're kind of modeling it after the Diné College educational philosophy. So the Nitsahakis planning portion, we're gonna kind of go through that right now. And so we're gonna go through those 4 models. So we are going to talk about land as pedagogy. So Leanne Samosi, she is a Anishinaabe scholar, writer, artist, and activist. So she published the article Land as Pedagogy, Anishinaabe Intelligence and Rebellious Transformation in 2014. And I read it last semester for a Native Research Methods class with Dr. Cynthia Benally, who she taught previously here at Diné College, and now she's at the University of Utah. She's an associate professor in the Education, Culture, and Society department, at the U of U. So she is an amazing professor, and this article we're going to kind of go over some highlights of it. There's a lot packed in, and we only have we have such little time, but we have included the article as a resource for you to access if you would like to read it. And Leanne, she also published Land as Pedagogy as a chapter in her book, As We Have Always Done, in 2017. In the beginning of the article and the book chapter, there's a Anishinaabe story. It's titled Bino Jin Makes a Lovely Discovery. And so the main character in the story is non-binary in her book chapter, Land as Pedagogy. So I just want to read this quote she wrote at the beginning of the book chapter version. She said, the main character in this version of the story is Bino Jin. Bino Jin means child. And please forgive me if I'm butchering the pronunciation. Previous versions of this story have the main character as a boy and a girl. This story is republished here with the main character, a gender non-conforming child, choosing to use the pronouns they and their. This changes the context of the story. I am repeating this story here deliberately to make the point that it is crucial we tell stories in a way that draws every member of our community into the stories, and to demonstrate the intelligence we all miss when we continue to uphold the colonial gender binary. So I think that's an important thing to note. Stories call for inclusivity. So land as pedagogy is also a framework for Indigenous education, and she talks about that in her article. And I want to ask a question to like the audience, to you. Like, in what ways do you incorporate land in your curriculum? And earlier, during the previous sessions, I did hear some comments. One that stood out to me, I didn't catch your name, was like, you said something like, I learned a lot working in the cornfield. And I was just like, yes, like in my head listening, I was like, that's, land is pedagogy right there. And then another gentleman, I didn't catch your name, sorry, you mentioned that you tutor and you take the students outside as a part of like a tutoring session to help them feel connected. And so I was like, right there, land is pedagogy. I mean, it's a title, but words have power. And, when you articulate something and you have a name for it, I feel like it's powerful. And so she developed like this framework and just what she talks about. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, by the way, these photos are mine. Not all of them, but this is a Gatlin Peak between Monument Valley and Kayenta, also called El Capitan, but beautiful, ancient, volcanic, rock formation, the plug of it. So, all right. So Simpson, she talks about education beyond Western institutional frameworks. I want to read this quote in her book, or in the article, sorry. Anishinaabe must stop looking for legitimacy within the colonizer's education system and return to valuing and recognizing our individual and collective intelligence on its own merits and on our own terms, withdrawing our considerable collective efforts to indigenize the academy in favor of a resurgence of indigenous intellectual systems and a reclamation of the context within which those systems operate, goes much further to propelling our nationhood and reestablishing indigenous political systems, because it places people back on the land in a context that's conducive to resurgence and mobilization. So that's a loaded, just passage right there. When I first read this, the first thing that stood out to me was indigenize the academy. And I realized I had been saying that when I had been talking to former mentors, and I was just I was cringing, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have a lot to learn. And it really made me it humbled me in the way of I need to explore this, and I need to really keep this in the back of my mind that the Western education system is, built upon from settler colonialism. And I think I'm still learning how to reconcile with this. I think this is a good article to kind of open yourself up to learning more about this. So I no longer say that, Indigenize the Academy. I think it's important to recognize that you're continually, learning and growing, and it never ends. And so being open, and it's important to, keep learning new concepts. So learning through direct engagement with land and community is another portion of the article she talks about, Simpson talks about. So I want to read this quote. This is from Robin Mall Kimmerer, her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. So in the settler mind, land was property real estate, capital, or natural resources, but to our people, it was everything: identity, the connection to our ancestors, the home of our non-human kinfolk, our pharmacy, our library, the source of all that sustained us. And I just really think that really encompasses what land, like pharmacy was the first thing, and then library that stood out to me when I read this quote. And I took a Native Research Methods class last semester with Dr. Cynthia Benally, and she, as a part of her curriculum, it's a grad course, but we had a learning as pedagogy assignment she assigned our class. And it was like every week we had to go out and observe, be in nature for like 30 minutes to an hour, and just kind of like document our thoughts, like what we experienced, and to just, be in the land and be still and just listen. So a lot of, and then as a part of like that, over the course of the semester, we did a paper talking about, she wanted us to think about a metaphor that we found represented in the land. So a metaphor that kind of represented what kind of researcher we wanted to be. So that took some time for me to kind of figure out. And at the end of the presentation, I will share a little bit of like what I wrote as a part of that assignment. And then we also had to do a multimodal option, a presentation, presenting to our class and to Dr. Benally, like what we, kind of like a summary of like our metaphor and what we experienced when we were out in, the land. And so we had a choice of like doing a PowerPoint presentation, doing a video, like creating a poem and presenting that. So I think having those options really helps like students. I think, all students there's all kinds of different learners, and multimodal options, I think, are really helpful in helping the students to be able to like express like what they feel. And you can get really creative with it. So that's just like something that maybe you want to do in your like classrooms, and you can, edit, revise that and tweak it to fit like your undergrad or class, or your elementary school class, your middle school class, whatever level. I think this assignment could be modified to fit. Okay. And then, this is Bears Ears from an area I was at. The photograph was taken near Paiute Farms, which is close to Oljeto and Monument Valley, Utah. So, yeah. Another photo of Bears Ears. This is on top of Cedar Mesa. But continuing land as pedagogy, another facet of the article Simpson writes about is Indigenous knowledge transmission through storytelling, experience, and relationships. And I want to share this quote from Daniel Heath Justice, a Cherokee scholar, writer. He published Why Indigenous Literatures Matter, which I'm currently reading for a class, and it's a really, really good book. I highly recommend it. So the quote is, "The earth speaks in a multitude of voices, only some of which are human. We exist alongside one another, our lives intersecting and overlapping in limitless and often unexpected ways. Story, song, poem, and prayer all serve to remind us of our connections to one another, human and other than human alike. And we are in deep, desperate need of such interventions to be good kin in a world of unfathomably complex relations." So that's just a powerful like observation, and I, highly agree with Justice, especially at this time where empathy is considered weak and it's not. I think storytelling has such a capacity to grow empathy in people, to grow kinship, to grow community. So Land as a teacher and a source of knowledge is another facet of land as pedagogy. And, you know, the class assignment that I spoke about in Dr. Benali's class, you know, you can incorporate like the objectives of like reflection, the writing portion, and then the presenting their research, that, you know, the observation when they're going out into the land, into the field, like that's research. So that this assignment I think is really powerful, and I think it can be changed and modified in so many different ways. This is just like one like little portion, like the activity that I explained earlier. Another way you can do it as well, I forgot to mention that in the Native Research Methods class, we were paired with another classmate, and we didn't observe like, you know, go out in the land together with the other classmate, but we had to check in, and we actually co-wrote the paper together. Sorry, that's a big thing I forgot to mention, but that was a way to create a relationality in the class, which is very important, and also I think a big part of like Indigenous like education, Indigenous rhetorics, that relationality, Indigenous epistemologies. So the practices of observation, listening, and participation in nature, I think, are really, really powerful, and can help with, you know, connection to land, connection to each other, provide empathy, provide like awareness. So someone earlier in the discussion mentioned that their class, they feel like that like disconnect. There's like a disconnect, and they're trying to label it. And I was just thinking, like, is the disconnect maybe like when I was listening, the disconnect of, you know, that we're not out in the land enough. We're not, you know, learning from the land, because it has so much to teach us and offer us, and it's so powerful. So I want to end my portion before we move on into the next section. So this is from Simpson's article. If the Academy is concerned about not only protecting and maintaining Indigenous intelligence, but revitalizing it on Indigenous terms as a form of restitution for its historic and contemporary role as a colonizing force, of which I see no evidence, then the Academy must make a conscious decision to become a decolonizing force in the intellectual lives of Indigenous peoples by joining us in dismantling settler colonialism and actively protecting the source of our knowledge, Indigenous land. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Okay. So I am going to talk a little bit more about that garden project that I mentioned beforehand. And it's one way you can collaborate with the land to teach students in your classrooms. And I have to say, you have a beautiful campus. It is absolutely beautiful here. And, you know, I love the university, but I would love a campus like this. I mean, you can see the clear sky, you can see all of the terrain around you, and, you know, it's just a blessing in itself to be surrounded by beautiful land. But before I go ahead and continue with that assignment, I do want to read from Joy Harjo, Catching the Light. I believe this is her newest book. She came to the University of Utah, and she spoke a little bit more about her poetry and her work, and, you know, what she does. And, you know, as I was reading this book, this piece that she wrote, Chapter 13, stuck out to me the most, especially as I was going ahead and thinking about ways that I wanted to ensure that students got the most out of the classroom. As scribes of our generation, we are called to remember what matters. We always begin the story with the land, how it is regarded, our relationship to it, and how we move about on it, how we honor the keepers of the land, and how we give back. Our materials, from baskets, painting and sculpture implements, instruments, inspirations, designs, architectural concepts, song concepts, and stories, are directly tied to some aspect of land, landscape, and place. Many of our origin stories involve emergence from the land, or they detail how we arrive here in this place. Our relationship to the land defines how we understand our place in the world. Our cultural stories live within our DNA and unwind throughout our lifetimes as singular entities and as native nations and countries. One Muscovy origin story, the Muscovy Nation is a confederacy of many smaller tribal towns and cultures bound together by geography, history, and belief, says that we emerge from darkness into the place where we were given everything we needed. We are cautioned to take care of what was given to us. We share Turtle Island with all plants, animals, and natural forces. When we veer from tending that connection, then we dim the light. When we build walls at borders, we destroy the light within all of us. When our need for oil destroys the homes of caribou and polar bears, then we are destroyed. What kind of Inuit culture would there be without ice, whales, and cultural paths of movement and renewal? During a convening of Native Arts and Cultures Foundation mentors, an Anishinaabe mentor, Wayne, and I'm going to butcher this, Minagojik Valerie, said, "We're not losing the birch trees. The birch trees are losing us." To regard the earth, or Ekanakawa, as a person, as a mother, is not a romantic notion. Understanding this will be essential to our survival. To understand this relationship means that we have respect for life, for the mother principle, for women who stand alongside men, not beneath them. In this collective earth crisis, we are experiencing the outcome of disconnection, of breaking the universal laws that appear in original teachings of most cultures in the world. Do not take more than you can use. Respect life, respect the giving of life, and give back. And like many other natives, I have resisted efforts to make the idea of our personhood synonymous with the land, because in past narratives, it has been used to dehumanize us. In the Papal Bull of 1450, Pope Nicholas V issued to King Afonso V of Portugal, the Romanus Pontifex, declaring war against all non-Christians throughout the world, and specifically sanctioning and promoting the conquest, colonization, and exploration of non-Christian nations and their territories. Pope Nicholas V directed King Afonso to capture, vanquish, and subdue the Sacreds, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to put them into perpetual slavery, and to take all their possessions and property. Cultural genocide means the destruction of the cultural legacy of what is America. There is no America without all our tribal nations, without the acknowledgement of our arts, cultures, and humanities, without the rich and varied contributions of the people and communities of these nations. Despite the history, the cultural repression, and attempts to make us disappear, the damage and even carnage we have persisted, we are resilient. Within our arts, cultures, and expressions of humanity, we have tended and envisioned ourselves as full members of resilient and living cultures. We are in the present. Our culture and artistic creations have freshly rooted images, sounds, and stories that can restore the American story, that can assist in the care and respect of the environment and in the betterment of quality of life for human beings and the earth herself. The old ones encourage and remind us, remember, remember to remember. And I feel like that piece is just so beautiful, the way that she talks about the earth and, that brings us all together. And it's just not only talking about one tribal nation, but it's talking about us all people who reside here on earth. I also wanted to bring up Joyce Rain Anderson, her chapter in this book here, Remapping Settler Colonial Territories, Bringing Local Native Knowledge into the Classroom. And there's a quote in that reading there that we have also attached to that drive that we will include as well. But she states, "This place is where stories live. Throughout the planting season, this land offers itself to the community. Our garden nourishes by giving traditional foods and offering stories. In the introduction to the land as memory, John Paul Jones writes, 'There is no place without a story. Every plant, every animal, every rock, and flowing spring carries a message. Native peoples of the Americas learned over thousands of years to listen to messages, and we know every habitat. We know the earth. We know the sky. We know the wind. We know the rain. We know the smells. We know the spirit of each living space. The spirit of each place is deeply embedded within us. We are connected to something larger than ourselves. This understanding of how we are connected to the land, how we are an extension of the land, how story is integral to all we know is critical to understanding how we teach Indigenous rhetorics. And with that quote, it helped me create these questions for the students when I asked them and I proposed the garden project to them. And the purpose originally for the project was the fact that us people, Indigenous people, we were the first inhabitants here on this earth, in this part of the land. And so much has been taken away from us, so much has been stripped away from a lot of our communities. And in some way, those students had no one to talk to about it. They didn't have anybody to share stories about, what their grandparents shared with them, or even, what it took for them to get to the University of Utah. Some of them started to even feel not empowered because they felt like their research and a lot of what they were doing wasn't enough because they were much different. And, in Amanda Tuccini's book, she talks a lot about that feeling of imposter syndrome, feeling invisible to others, not feeling enough to get through school, and not feeling that your research is important. But I wanted to show students Indigenous authors, both from this book, Survivance, Sovereignty, and Story, but also from Joy Harjo. I wanted to share so many Indigenous authors as much as I could in that time together. But 16 weeks is very short, as you all really know. And so in these projects, I wanted to ensure that each student had the opportunity to focus on what means the most to them based on their own interests, their own stories, their own upbringing, and their own majors as well. And in that first question, I asked them, is there a plant, an inhabitant, object, story, historical text, or issue related to the climate you would like to focus on? So food sovereignty, land, water rights, treaty violations, history of activism, or even the history of mining of natural resources, as well as cultural narratives and stories. There were so many students who focused on uranium mining, and I love that you brought that up in your presentation because it's something that so many of us just had not been aware of growing up. I did not know too much about the mining of uranium until I got to the University of Utah. It took that long of a time for me to realize and reflect on all of these many things that, yes, our grandparents hid us and tried to not, talk too much about it because it was harming our people. But I realized that there is a lot of activism and there are a lot of people who are trying to ensure that, these mines are either closed or something is done to ensure that this harm no longer harms our people here. But also in the second question, how is maintaining a community garden a great way to practice living a more sustainable life? So on campus, there are 3 gardens where they can go visit, and primarily one that was just recently named utilizing a Ute name. I don't know how to say it well because I'm not Ute, but it is a beautiful space where, they can go to, and even sometimes I see students, not mine, but just students on campus sitting in the garden, sharing that space with the plants. They also do accept volunteers all across campus. It's not just my class. I just had the great privilege of working with the community garden there on campus. I also opened it up to going out into Tsaile community or whatever community that they are a part of, and going to go see those community gardens as well, which is incredible in itself. Third, how has the earth around you taught you about yourself or the beings that reside on this earth with us? And that question, really, I wanted to ensure that they had that opportunity to talk a little bit more about their experience being in that garden, or even their experience growing up, whether they had that same similar experience growing up on the reservation, hauling water, caring for livestock, not having electricity, having to bring in firewood, having to chop it. They were really surprised that I knew exactly what they were talking about, but I absolutely understand how much that is such an integral part of ourselves and our research as well. And lastly, think about a story about the land you were told when you were younger, or one that you have learned growing up. And of course, I wanted to make space for those who wanted to share any stories or even a story about them growing up. Having that opportunity for them to then become storytellers as much as us grow up to eventually become, just by the guidance of our elders, our grandparents, and our parents. So many of us continue on. I've seen many authors, poetry come out from talking about these stories. Joy Harjo is definitely one of the individuals that I talk about all the time. Kinsell Drake has been a very close friend of mine, and she has been incredible at definitely being an activist about land and land rights as well, as is many, many other Indigenous authors as well. So even if they wanted to share a story about a book that they had read or a poet that they have come across, I wanted to share that space in that assignment. So this is a picture of them working in that community garden. This individual here is Gabrielle. Gabrielle is the individual that I collaborated with to ensure that the students had a space to go ahead and work with the land and really get their hands dirty. I mean, I'm sure many of you can relate to this, but as a res kid, you love being out there. You love the dirt, you love the land, you know, the mud and the mixture of everything else. And going back to Joyce Reinhardt, the smells. You remember the smell after it rains. And a lot of my students mentioned that they love that feeling of that fresh smell of the dirt as they were digging or as they were picking goji berries. They remembered how good it felt to be out there, immersed in the land and just learning and taking away as much as they could. Here's more of my students picking those goji berries. The individuals in the middle were planning new harvests, so it's really cool to see that, you know, in that one patch that they eventually, it grew. And I don't remember what they were planting there, but they plant a mixture of vegetables, flowers, fruit, and that all goes to the community pantry that's there on campus. So the campus community pantry, where students can come and take food for free. So none of that food goes to waste. It goes directly back to the students. But they were able to either pull weeds, work and plant in the garden, or even pick goji berries for themselves, or to give back to their campus community as well, which is also an amazing, amazing thing that they were able to do. I also got the chance to work alongside of them. I truly did not teach for this class. I let the land be the teacher. I really had nothing to say. I think just going outside and being outside is enough. I mean, if you just reflect, I mean, even at nighttime, when you look up at the stars, you think about so many things and you reflect on us as human beings and, you know, Creator and all of the many things that He has created for us here. And these are some of the goji berries that I picked, but also some of the students gave it to me. So I still have a bag frozen in my freezer that I don't plan on touching for right now, but it brings me great joy to just see them immersed in the garden and doing that work for themselves. So I wanted to end on this quote here by Alan Cushman, the title of Toward a Rhetoric of Self-Representation, Identity Politics in Indian Country and Rhetoric and Composition. She states, a rhetoric of self-representation facilitates cross-cultural understanding between writers and their audiences. On the other hand, it offers writers a way of constructing these gathered narratives of self, while on the other hand, it offers a way for various audiences to hear the cultural logics and rhetoric exigencies, informing these constructions because a rhetoric of self-representation includes evidence of both being in and doing for a community, It also allows writers and their audiences to proceed from within a responsibility logic that includes an ethic of reciprocity between scholars and their communities. When applied to Native scholars, a rhetoric of self-representation reveals the cultural logics that these scholars must write to and from. Cultural logics that differ significantly from other scholars of color. By unfolding the cultural logics that imbue all Native scholars' identity constructions, a rhetoric of self-representation affords audiences of white scholars and scholars of colors one way to engage in rhetorical listening. So I wanted to invite all of you to come with me outside to kind of participate in what I basically had my students do, which was to immerse themselves in that land. But I wanted to give you 20 minutes to go do that and then take an additional 10-minute break. Is that right, Christie?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So 20 minutes to reflect on these questions while also taking a break and getting up to do what you need to do. But the first question is, what comes to mind when you hear land as pedagogy? So what did you first think about our title of our presentation? In what ways is the land a teacher? Or what can you do? What can the land teach that we can't? What kind of similar assignments or lessons do you teach in your classroom? And I would love to hear back from all of you. So I will give you the opportunity to take a walk outside as well as stretch your legs as well. So we'll return at 2:35. Thank you.
I'm not